Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey, not to the Grand Colosseum or the magnificent Roman baths, but deep into the often overlooked foundation of Roman engineering, the aqueducts. We're going to peel back the layers of awe and marvel to reveal how Roman aqueducts were awful for workers. You might imagine a few skilled engineers gracefully directing construction, but trust me, the reality was a brutal, backbreaking, and incredibly dangerous ordeal for the countless laborers. A quick reality check. You, with your basic safety standards and aversion to manual labor, probably wouldn't last a single day on an aqueduct construction site. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might gaze at the towering arches of a Roman aqueduct and think of architectural genius and imperial grandeur. But the very first step in their creation, the source of their monumental stone, was a place of unimaginable suffering for the workers, the grueling quarry labor. Forget modern machinery and pneumatic drills. Every single block of stone was extracted through sheer human brute force, sweat, and often blood. Imagine yourself, a laborer, perhaps a slave, a condemned criminal, or a conscripted peasant, standing at the face of a massive rock quarry in the scorching Roman sun. The air is thick with dust, stinging your eyes and coating your throat. The heat radiates off the rock, making every breath a struggle. You hear the rhythmic clang of hammers, the scraping of chisels, and the shouts of overseers, a monotonous symphony of endless toil. Your tools are primitive iron chisels, heavy hammers, and wooden wedges. Imagine swinging a heavy hammer, hour after hour, aiming for a precise point on the rock face. Your muscles scream, your hands blister and bleed, and the vibration from each impact jars your entire body. The goal is to carve out massive blocks of stone, often weighing many tons without any mechanical assistance beyond simple levers and ropes. This is relentless, repetitive strain, pushing your body to its absolute limits. A common historical fact is that Roman quarries, like those in Carrara for marble or in Egypt for granite, employed thousands of laborers, many of whom were slaves or convicts, in incredibly harsh conditions. The dangers were constant and immediate. Imagine the terrifying rumble as a massive block, once painstakingly separated, begins to shift unexpectedly. A sudden crack, a falling stone, and you could be crushed instantly. Your life snuffed out in a moment of brute force. The risk of rockfalls, cave-ins if working in underground quarries, or accidental injuries from sharp tools was ever present. You'd see men around you suffering grievous wounds, shattered limbs from falling debris, deep gashes from errant chisels, or eyes blinded by flying stone chips. There were no safety protocols, no hard hats, no emergency medical services beyond rudimentary care that often led to infection and slow death. If you were injured, you were often discarded, left to die, or became a burden to your comrades. The dust was a silent killer. Imagine inhaling the fine, pervasive stone dust with every breath, day in and day out. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it led to chronic respiratory illnesses like silicosis, a debilitating lung disease that would slowly choke you to death. You'd witness men around you coughing incessantly, spitting blood, their lungs failing, their bodies wasting away. Their eventual deaths would be a direct consequence of their labor, a grim testament to the cost of imperial ambition. Archaeological evidence from ancient quarry sites often reveals skeletal remains with signs of severe respiratory disease and dramatically shortened lifespans. Food and water were meager, just enough to sustain your labor, but rarely to nourish you properly. You'd be perpetually hungry, malnourished. Your body a constant testament to deprivation. The scorching sun, combined with intense physical exertion, led to rampant dehydration and heat stroke. Imagine collapsing from the heat, your body unable to continue, knowing that if you couldn't be revived, your fate was sealed. The living conditions in the quarry camps were equally awful. You'd sleep in cramped, unsanitary barracks, exposed to the elements, sharing space with thousands of other exhausted, unwashed laborers. Disease would spread rapidly through these crowded, filthy conditions, making the camps breeding grounds for epidemics. So, as you gaze at the magnificent arches of a Roman aqueduct, remember that their monumental beauty began with unimaginable human suffering. The grueling quarry labor was a brutal, dangerous, and often fatal process, where countless lives were sacrificed to extract the very stone that built Rome's grandeur. It certainly makes you appreciate modern construction safety and machinery, doesn't it? For the workers, every block of stone was carved out with their sweat, pain, and life. You've just been introduced to the brutal, dust-choked reality of quarry labor, the first step in building Rome's magnificent aqueducts. But not all of the aqueduct's channels ran above ground. Many stretched for miles, deep beneath the earth, requiring a different, equally terrifying form of labor tunneling's claustrophobic nightmare. Forget open skies. This was a brutal, confined, and often deadly reality of digging underground channels, where darkness, suffocation, and sudden collapse were constant threats. Imagine yourself, now a laborer, deep within a mountain or hill, far from the light of day. Your task is to chip through solid rock, carving out a perfectly graded channel for the aqueduct's water. The air around you is thick, not just with dust from your constant chiseling, but with the pervasive smell of stale earth, sweat, and the acrid smoke from your flickering oil lamp. The silence is profound, broken only by the rhythmic clang of hammers against stone, the grunts of exertion, and the occasional terrifying creak from above. The claustrophobia is immediate and overwhelming. You're working in incredibly confined spaces. Tunnels were often just wide enough for a man to work, and perhaps only tall enough for him to stoop or crawl. Imagine being deep underground, perhaps hundreds of feet below the surface, surrounded by tons of solid rock pressing in on all sides. Your movements are restricted, your body constantly cramped and aching. The darkness is absolute, pierced only by the weak, flickering flame of your small oil lamp, which casts long, dancing shadows that seem to press in even further. This isn't just uncomfortable. It's a primal fear, a feeling of being buried alive, every waking moment. A common historical fact is that Roman tunnelers, or ferrarii, used a method called fire setting to crack rock, involving heating the rock face with fire and then dousing it with cold water, which produced immense amounts of smoke and steam, adding to the awful conditions. Then there's the constant, terrifying threat of collapse. Roman engineers were incredibly skilled, but they were still digging through unpredictable rock formations. Imagine hearing a sudden, terrifying crack from the ceiling above, or feeling the ground tremble beneath your feet. A rockfall could happen in an instant, burying you alive under tons of debris, or crushing your limbs. You'd work in perpetual fear, your ears straining for any sign of instability, knowing that the very earth around you could become your tomb at any moment. Even if a full collapse didn't occur, smaller rockfalls were common, causing serious injuries or concussions. Suffocation was another insidious killer. Deep underground, ventilation was incredibly poor. Your lungs would burn from inhaling fine rock dust with every breath, leading to chronic respiratory illnesses, just like in the quarries. But beyond dust, the air itself could become stale and thin, depleted of oxygen by your own respiration in the burning lamps. Imagine feeling your breath grow shallower, your head pounding, your body weakening from oxygen deprivation. If the tunnel was particularly deep or long, or if a sudden collapse blocked an air shaft, you could simply suffocate, slowly and agonizingly, in the darkness. Historians still debate the specific causes of death for tunnel workers, but a combination of rockfalls, suffocation from poor air quality, and chronic respiratory diseases were undoubtedly major factors. The work itself was brutal, with handpicks, hammers, and chisels, You'd chip away at the rock face for hours on end, day after day. Imagine the repetitive strain on your arms and shoulders, the constant vibration up your body, the exhaustion that permeated every fiber of your being. You'd be perpetually covered in dust, sweat, and grime, your body aching in places you didn't even know existed. Water was scarce underground, and what little you had, combined with the lack of sanitation, could lead to frequent bouts of dysentery and other waterborne diseases. Imagine suffering from stomach cramps and dehydration in the confines of a dark tunnel, far from any proper relief. Escape from such conditions was virtually impossible. You were deep underground, often miles from the entrance, surrounded by guards, and utterly disoriented by the darkness and the labyrinthine tunnels. Even if you somehow managed to break free, the chances of navigating your way out or surviving in the desolate areas around the quarries were almost nil. So, as you gaze at the grand Roman aqueducts, remember that many of their magnificent channels were carved through solid rock by human hands. Tunneling was a claustrophobic nightmare, a brutal ordeal of darkness, suffocation, and sudden death, where countless lives were sacrificed to bring water to Rome's glorious cities. It certainly makes you appreciate modern tunnel boring machines and proper ventilation systems, doesn't it? For the workers, the aqueduct's underground passages were often literal death traps. You've just been trapped in the claustrophobic nightmare of tunneling, a brutal reality for aqueduct workers. But not all of the aqueduct system was hidden underground. Some of its most iconic structures reached skyward, requiring a different, equally perilous form of labor bridge building heights and hazards. Forget modern cranes and safety harnesses. This was a terrifying, vertigo-inducing work of constructing towering aqueduct arches, where a single misstep meant a swift, fatal plunge to the ground below. Imagine yourself now a laborer, perched precariously on a wooden scaffolding, hundreds of feet above the ground. You're working on a massive Roman aqueduct bridge, perhaps like the Pont du Gard, its towering arches stretching across a vast valley. The wind whips past you, threatening to unbalance your footing. The sun beats down relentlessly, making the rough stone hot to the touch. You hear the shouts of overseers from below, the rhythmic clanging of hammers, and the chilling creak of the wooden scaffolding under the immense weight of stone. Your heart pounds, not just from exertion, but from the constant dizzying height. The construction of these arches was an incredible feat of engineering, but it relied entirely on human muscle and rudimentary tools. You'd be involved in hauling massive stone blocks into position. Imagine yourself straining against thick ropes, pulling and pushing colossal pieces of cut stone, each weighing many tons, up temporary ramps and over wooden scaffolding. Every muscle in your body screams with effort, your hands raw and bleeding from the ropes and rough stone. A single slip by one man, a moment of weakness, could send the entire block, and those working on it, plummeting to the ground below. A common historical fact is that the Roman arch, a key innovation, allowed for much larger and more stable structures. But their construction still presented immense logistical and safety challenges. The scaffolding itself was inherently dangerous. Constructed from timber, lashed together with ropes and secured to the rising masonry, these temporary structures were often rickety and prone to collapse. Imagine balancing on narrow wooden planks, high above the valley floor, your footing uncertain, knowing that any structural weakness could send you, and dozens of your comrades hurtling downwards. The wood would creak and groan under the weight. The ropes might fray, and strong winds could add a terrifying sway. You'd constantly check your footing, your eyes darting, a perpetual anxiety about the stability of your temporary perch. Historians still debate the precise methods of scaffolding construction for Roman aqueducts and other tall structures, but the inherent risks of working at such heights with primitive equipment are undeniable. Then there was the ever-present threat of falling. Imagine taking a single misstep on a narrow ledge, or losing your grip on a rope, and feeling yourself plunge through the empty air. The scream would barely leave your lips before the brutal impact with the ground hundreds of feet below. Death would be instantaneous, your body a shattered mess. You'd witness men falling, their silent descent a horrifying daily reminder of the constant danger. The ground beneath the construction site would likely be littered with broken bodies, a grim testament to the cost of building Rome's grandeur. Even the assembly of the arches was perilous. Each stone block had to be precisely placed, often lifted into position by teams of men using block and tackle systems. Imagine guiding a massive stone into place, its weight immense, knowing that a miscalculation or a slip could crush your fingers, or dislodge the entire arch, sending it crashing down. The precision required for these monumental structures demanded unwavering focus, even under the most terrifying conditions. The weather added another layer of peril. The scorching summer sun caused heat stroke and dehydration, impairing judgment and weakening muscles. Sudden thunderstorms could turn the stone surfaces slick and treacherous, increasing the risk of falls. Imagine working on slippery stone in a driving rain, hundreds of feet up, the wind and lightning adding to your terror. The psychological toll of working at such dizzying heights, day after day, would be immense. You'd live with a constant fear of falling, a perpetual sense of vertigo. Your dreams would likely be filled with images of plunging through the air, or the faces of comrades who met their end on the ground below. This wasn't just a job, it was a daily confrontation with your own mortality, a constant test of nerve and physical endurance. So, as you gaze at the magnificent arches of a Roman aqueduct, remember that their towering beauty was built with unimaginable human suffering. Bridge building was a terrifying ordeal of heights and hazards, where countless lives were sacrificed, falling from rickety scaffolding and unstable arches, all to bring water to Rome's glorious cities. It certainly makes you appreciate modern construction safety, advanced machinery, and the presence of safety nets, doesn't it? For the workers, every arch was a monument to their pain and potential death. You've just endured the terrifying heights and hazards of bridge building, a perilous feat in Roman aqueduct construction. But even after the monumental structures were complete, a more insidious silent killer awaited many workers, lingering in the very water they sought to deliver lead poisoning. The silent killer. Forget quick, dramatic accidents. This was a slow, agonizing, and often debilitating chronic illness faced by countless laborers who dealt with lead pipes, linings, and processing, an unseen price for Rome's advanced water supply. Imagine yourself, a laborer, not on a towering arch, but in a bustling Roman workshop, or deep within the city's plumbing network. You're involved with the distribution system of the aqueduct, specifically the widespread use of lead pipes fistulae and lead linings. The Romans used lead extensively due to its malleability, its relative ease of working, and its resistance to corrosion. You might be involved in molding lead sheets, soldering pipes, or maintaining the vast network of conduits that brought water directly to homes, public fountains, and baths. A common historical fact is that despite a general awareness of lead's toxicity, its widespread use in plumbing was never fully abandoned by the Romans. The danger begins with the processing of lead itself. Imagine smelting raw lead ore, or melting down lead ingots to form pipes. The air would be filled with noxious lead fumes, invisible but incredibly toxic. You'd breathe this in all day, every day. Your lungs constantly assaulted, even without smelting. Simply handling large quantities of lead, or grinding lead-based pigments used in paints and cosmetics, but also potentially in water channels, could lead to significant exposure through inhalation or ingestion. You might constantly taste a metallic tang in your mouth, a subtle sign of the poison entering your system. Then there's the direct contact. Imagine your hands, raw and perhaps cut from rough work, constantly touching lead surfaces. Lead dust would accumulate on your skin, in your clothes, and in the environment. You'd inadvertently ingest it as you ate with unwashed hands, or as it settled on your food and drink. There was no concept of lead hygiene, no washing hands thoroughly, no proper ventilation, no protective gear like gloves or masks. Your body was a conduit for the silent killer. The effects of lead poisoning? or plumbism were insidious because they were often slow and cumulative. You wouldn't drop dead instantly. Instead, you'd start experiencing a range of debilitating symptoms. Imagine chronic, agonizing stomach pains and cramps, known as colic, often mistaken for other digestive ailments. You might suffer from persistent fatigue and muscle weakness, your limbs feeling heavy and sluggish. Your joints would ache and your body would feel perpetually tired, even after rest. Neurological symptoms were equally terrifying. Imagine suffering from frequent, severe headaches, ringing in your ears, or inexplicable irritability and mood swings. In severe cases, lead poisoning could lead to paralysis, particularly wrist drop, where the muscles in the wrist become too weak to lift the hand, seizures, and profound cognitive impairment, eventually leading to madness or coma. You might watch your fellow workers slowly descend into these terrifying symptoms, their minds and bodies failing, with no understanding of the underlying cause, perhaps attributing it to a curse or bad luck. Historians and medical researchers still find evidence of elevated lead levels in the skeletal remains of Roman populations, providing direct evidence of widespread lead exposure. For workers whose kidneys were damaged by lead, the resulting kidney failure would be a slow, agonizing death, often mistaken for other illnesses. Lead also had devastating effects on the reproductive system, leading to infertility, miscarriages, and stillbirths. Imagine a family struggling with repeated losses, unaware that the very material you worked with was slowly poisoning their chances of having healthy children. The lack of understanding about lead's toxicity meant that medical treatments were utterly ineffective. Physicians might attempt bloodletting or purging, only further weakening an already poisoned individual. The suffering was prolonged, agonizing, and often resulted in a slow, miserable death, with the true cause often remaining a mystery. So, as you gaze at the magnificent aqueduct system, marveling at how it brought clean water to Rome, remember the hidden price. Lead poisoning was a silent killer, slowly and insidiously consuming the lives of countless workers who handled the very materials that made the system function. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for lead-free plumbing and modern occupational safety standards, doesn't it? For the workers, the very grandeur of Rome's water supply was often a source of their slow, agonizing demise. You've just been introduced to the insidious, slow death of lead poisoning, a hidden cost of Rome's impressive aqueducts. But even the water itself, the very thing these massive structures were built to deliver, carried its own terrifying, invisible threats. Now, prepare to confront waterborne diseases, the unseen threat, where rampant illnesses caused by contaminated water sources and unhygienic conditions silently decimated the workforce, turning life-giving water into a source of widespread sickness and death. Imagine yourself, a laborer on an aqueduct construction site. You're exhausted from the grueling work in the sun, your throat parched, desperate for a drink. The very purpose of the aqueduct is to bring water, but the irony is grim. The water available to you, and the conditions in which you live and work, are often teeming with pathogens. Your primary source of hydration might be directly from the local rivers, streams, or stagnant pools near the construction site. Imagine dipping your cup into murky, untreated water, perhaps knowing that animals graze upstream, or that human waste is disposed of carelessly nearby. There were no water purification plants, no boiling, no filtration on a large scale for the workers. You drink it anyway, because you have no choice, your thirst overwhelming any apprehension. A common historical fact is that while Roman cities had impressive sewer systems, the understanding of microscopic pathogens in water was millennia away, leading to widespread waterborne diseases. The most rampant killer in such conditions was dysentery. Imagine your stomach cramping violently, a searing pain twisting your insides. You suffer from relentless, watery diarrhea, often bloody, leading to rapid and severe dehydration. Your body weakens quickly, your muscles cramp, and a high fever sets in. In a world without rehydration salts, antibiotics, or effective medical care, dysentery could be a swift and agonizing killer, especially for individuals already weakened by hard labor and malnutrition. You'd see men collapsing, their cries of agony echoing through the work camp, their bodies wasting away, with no hope of recovery. This wasn't a rare occurrence, it was a constant, terrifying threat that could sweep through an entire workforce. Beyond dysentery, other waterborne illnesses like typhoid fever and cholera, though perhaps not strictly identical to modern cholera, severe diarrheal diseases with similar symptoms were also prevalent. Imagine suffering from a prolonged, debilitating fever, intense headaches, and extreme fatigue. Your body racked with internal distress. These illnesses would incapacitate workers for weeks and often lead to death, especially among those whose immune systems were already compromised by the brutal living and working conditions. The construction camps themselves were breeding grounds for disease. Thousands of laborers, often slaves, soldiers, or convicts, lived in crowded, unsanitary barracks. Imagine the pervasive stench of human waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies. Latrines, if they existed, were rudimentary and often overflowed. Water sources would become easily contaminated by runoff from the camps. This extreme lack of hygiene, combined with poor nutrition and constant physical exertion, created a perfect storm for epidemics to erupt and spread with terrifying speed. You were living in a literal petri dish of sickness. Historians still debate the specific types and strains of pathogens prevalent in ancient Roman work camps. But the high rates of mortality from diarrheal diseases and fevers are well documented from skeletal analysis and historical accounts of large-scale construction. Even the mosquitoes, drawn to stagnant water near the construction sites or existing marshes, posed a threat, spreading malaria. Imagine suffering from recurring bouts of intense fever, chills, and debilitating fatigue, weakening you further and making you unable to work, eventually leading to chronic illness or death. This cyclical illness would sap your strength, making you even more vulnerable to other diseases. The psychological toll of living under this constant, invisible threat was immense. You might attribute your sickness, or the sickness of your comrades, to bad luck, divine displeasure, or simply the harshness of life. You'd live in a state of perpetual anxiety, knowing that every drink of water, every communal meal, every day spent in the unsanitary camp could bring about a debilitating illness or a slow, agonizing death. So, as you gaze at the magnificent aqueducts, marveling at the clean water they brought to Rome, remember the hidden price, the unseen threat of waterborne diseases that silently decimated the workforce? Countless lives were sacrificed not just to the physical demands of construction, but to the pathogens lurking in the very water they sought to control, turning life-giving water into a source of widespread sickness and death. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern water treatment facilities and sanitation systems, doesn't it? For the workers, the aqueduct was a marvel, but also a monument built with the bodies of the sick and the dying. You've just confronted the terrifying, unseen threat of waterborne diseases, a constant danger for aqueduct workers. But even when the water was relatively clean, the sheer act of laboring under the relentless Roman sun presented its own immediate and brutal peril: sunstroke and dehydration. Forget hydrating drinks and shaded breaks. This was a constant battle against the elements, a relentless toll of working under the scorching Mediterranean sun that often led to collapse, delirium, and a swift, agonizing death. Imagine yourself, a laborer, toiling on a vast aqueduct construction site in the middle of summer. The sun beats down with an intensity that seems to burn your skin. The air shimmers with heat, and there's little to no natural shade. You're performing incredibly strenuous physical labor, lifting heavy stones, mixing mortar, digging trenches, for hours on end, day after day. Your body is sweating profusely, trying desperately to cool itself, but the moisture quickly evaporates in the dry, hot air. The first symptoms of dehydration begin subtly. You feel a persistent thirst, a dryness in your mouth. You might try to drink what little water is available, often warm and unappetizing, but it's rarely enough to replace the fluids you're losing. As dehydration worsens, your muscles begin to cramp, first subtly, then agonizingly. Imagine your calves seizing up, your hands clenching involuntarily, making it impossible to continue your work. Your head starts to throb with a dull, persistent ache, a harbinger of worse to come. A common historical fact is that many ancient armies and labor forces suffered greatly from dehydration and heat-related illnesses, which significantly impacted their effectiveness and survival rates. Then comes heat stroke, a far more terrifying condition. Your body's natural cooling mechanisms begin to fail, you stop sweating, or your sweat becomes insufficient. Your skin feels hot and dry to the touch, or paradoxically, clammy. Your head pounds relentlessly, and dizziness sets in, making it hard to stand upright. You become disoriented, confused, your thoughts muddled. Imagine staggering, your vision blurring, unable to respond clearly to the shouts of your overseers. You might hallucinate, seeing mirages in the shimmering heat, or hearing voices that aren't there. This mental confusion, born of extreme heat, could lead to further accidents, a fatal misstep on a high arch, or a collapse into a trench. Your core body temperature rises to dangerous levels, causing organ failure. Imagine your heart racing, struggling to pump blood, your breathing becoming shallow and rapid. You might collapse without warning, falling unconscious in the dust, your body convulsing. In this state, your life is hanging by a thread. There were no immediate medical interventions, no IV fluids, no air-conditioned tents, no emergency cool-down procedures. Your comrades might try to move you into what little shade exists, or splash some precious water on you. But often, it was too little, too late. You'd see men around you succumb to the heat, their bodies seizing, their lives ending abruptly and brutally under the merciless sun. Historians still debate the specific causes of death for many Roman laborers, but heat stroke and related complications were undoubtedly a major and frequent killer on large construction projects in hot climates. The psychological toll of this constant battle against the elements was immense. You'd live in perpetual fear of the sun, knowing its power to weaken, debilitate, and kill. Every clear, cloudless day would bring a wave of anxiety, and every shadow would be a coveted, temporary sanctuary. You'd constantly feel the drain on your energy, the slow sapping of your vitality, knowing that your body had to perform brutal labor, even under the most oppressive conditions. For those who survived heat stroke, the long-term effects could be debilitating. Permanent brain damage, kidney problems, or chronic fatigue could leave you unable to work, effectively ending your usefulness and condemning you to a life of destitution, or a return to slave status if you were a free laborer. The sun, a source of life for Rome's agriculture, became a relentless tormentor for its aqueduct builders. So, as you feel the warmth of your room tonight, remember that for countless laborers building Roman aqueducts, the very source of life, the sun, was a brutal enemy. Sunstroke and dehydration were silent, pervasive killers, claiming lives agonizingly slowly or with terrifying suddenness, all for the sake of bringing water to Rome's glorious cities. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for shade, ample hydration, and air conditioning, doesn't it? For the workers, the aqueduct was a monument built with their sweat, their delirium, and their very lives, baked under the merciless Roman sun. You've just been scorched by the relentless sun and suffered the agony of dehydration, a constant peril for aqueduct workers. But beyond these environmental threats, the very act of construction, with its heavy materials and rudimentary tools, created a constant, brutal reality accidents and injuries. No safety net. Forget modern safety protocols, helmets, or emergency services. On Roman aqueduct sites, falls, crushes, and untreated wounds were terrifyingly common, turning every workday into a gamble with crippling injury or swift death. Imagine yourself a laborer, high on a scaffold or deep in a trench. Your muscles ache, your hands are raw, and your mind is fatigued from relentless toil. But you cannot afford a single moment of inattention, because danger is literally all around you. You are constantly surrounded by moving stone, shifting earth, and hundreds of other straining bodies, all with limited visibility and primitive tools. One of the most terrifying threats was the risk of falling. Imagine hauling a heavy stone block up a temporary ramp, your feet slipping on loose gravel, or your hand missing its grip. Or perhaps you're working high on the arches, hundreds of feet above the valley floor, balancing on narrow wooden planks. A misstep, a sudden gust of wind, a jostling by a comrade, and you could lose your footing. The next sensation would be the terrifying plunge through empty air, a scream caught in your throat, followed by the sickening, brutal impact with the ground below. Death would be instantaneous, your body a shattered mess. You'd witness men falling, their silent descent a horrifying, daily reminder of the constant danger. There were no safety nets, no harnesses, no way to prevent these fatal tumbles. A common historical fact is that falls from height were a major cause of death on all large Roman construction projects, from aqueducts to temples, to then there was the constant threat of being crushed by falling stone or collapsing structures. Imagine hundreds of tons of stone being hauled, lifted, and positioned. A rope snapping, a lever slipping, or a column of stones becoming unstable could send massive blocks plummeting downwards, crushing anyone in their path. You'd hear the terrifying rumble, the shout of warning, and then the sickening crunch as bodies were obliterated. Even smaller stones, dislodged by tools or movement, could cause severe head injuries or broken bones. You're working in a dynamic, unstable environment, where gravity and immense weight are constant, unforgiving enemies. Historians still debate the precise engineering safety margins of Roman construction, but the sheer number of manual laborers and the rudimentary nature of lifting equipment ensured frequent, severe crushing injuries. Injuries from tools and equipment were also rampant. You're swinging heavy hammers, wielding sharp chisels, pushing unwieldy levers, or operating simple winches. A slip of the hand, a glancing blow, or a moment of fatigue could lead to a deep gash from a chisel, a shattered finger from a hammer, or a severed limb from a heavy rope. Imagine a bone protruding through your skin, or a wound that bleeds profusely, attracting flies and dirt. Without any understanding of germ theory or antiseptics, even minor cuts could quickly become infected. A high fever, swelling, and agonizing pain would signal the onset of a potentially fatal infection, often leading to gangrene and a slow, miserable death if not amputated, a grim procedure in itself. As we've explored, you'd see men with missing fingers, limping gaits, or permanently disfigured faces, living testaments to the dangers of their trade. The very materials also posed dangers. Mixing mortar without protective gear could cause chemical burns to skin and eyes. Handling rough, unhewn stone caused constant abrasions and lacerations. You'd be perpetually covered in cuts, scrapes, and bruises, your body a canvas of past injuries. For those who suffered severe injuries, there was effectively no safety net. There were no workers' compensation schemes, no disability benefits, and no long-term medical care. If you were too injured to work, you were often simply discarded. If you were a slave, you might be left to die, or summarily killed to avoid being a burden. If you were a free laborer, you would become destitute, forced to beg or rely on charity. Your life as a productive member of society utterly destroyed. Your suffering, your inability to work, made you a burden, not a patient. The psychological toll of living and working under this constant threat of crippling injury or sudden death would be immense. You develop a grim fatalism, an acceptance that your body was expendable. Every day was a gamble, every task a potential step towards agonizing pain or oblivion. You'd witness suffering regularly, growing hardened to the sight of mangled bodies, but the underlying fear for your own life would always be present. So, as you gaze at the smooth flow of water through modern pipes, Remember that for countless laborers building Roman aqueducts, every drop came at an immense human cost. Accidents and injuries were rampant, turning every construction site into a perilous battleground where falls, crushes, and untreated wounds led to agony and swift death. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern safety regulations, medical care, and workers' rights, doesn't it? For the workers, the aqueduct was a monument built with shattered bones and sacrificed lives. You've just been introduced to the terrifying reality of accidents and injuries on an aqueduct construction site, where a single misstep could lead to crippling pain or swift death. But for a vast number of those straining under the Roman sun, the suffering was compounded by a far more brutal reality: forced labor, chains, and cruelty. Forget volunteering for a grand project. This was condemnation to relentless, backbreaking work, enforced by the lash for those stripped of their freedom. Imagine yourself, a Roman laborer, but not a free citizen earning a wage. You are a slave, perhaps captured in a distant war, born into servitude, or condemned to this fate as punishment for a crime. Your life, your body, your very existence is not your own. You are res, a thing, a piece of property, a human tool to be used and discarded at will. This fundamental lack of freedom permeated every agonizing moment of your work on the aqueduct. A common historical fact is that a significant portion of the labor force for large Roman infrastructure projects, including aqueducts, consisted of slaves, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals. Your day is defined by unrelenting toil. Imagine being awakened before dawn, perhaps still stiff and sore from the previous day's brutal labor. You're given meager rations, coarse bread, gruel, and water, just enough to fuel your body for another day of strenuous work, but never enough to truly satisfy your hunger or nourish you properly. You are immediately marched to the work site, often chained in groups to prevent escape and enforce discipline. Imagine the constant jingle of chains with every step, a persistent, chilling reminder of your bondage. The overseers were often former soldiers, hardened by combat, or brutalized slaves themselves. Granted authority by the project managers, they were driven by quotas and a ruthless efficiency, and they had absolute power over you. Any perceived laziness, any slowing of pace, any act of defiance would be met with immediate and brutal punishment. Imagine the searing pain of the lash as a whip cracks across your bare back, tearing flesh, leaving burning welts and open wounds. You'd hear the screams of others, or feel the blows yourself. Understanding that resistance was futile and only invited more agony, you'd see men collapse from exhaustion, only to be beaten until they rose again, or left to die if they truly couldn't move. The overseer's word was law, and their cruelty unrestrained. Historians still debate the specific motivations and conditions under which Roman overseers operated, but their use of brutal force to extract labor is well documented. You would be forced to perform the most physically demanding tasks, quarrying massive stones, hauling them up steep ramps, digging long trenches in the scorching sun, or mixing vast quantities of heavy mortar. Imagine the constant strain on your muscles, your joints, your entire body. Your hands would be raw and calloused, your skin perpetually caked with dust, sweat, and grime. There was no concept of rest or recovery. Your body was pushed to its absolute limits, day after day, until it broke. The living conditions in the work camps were deplorable. You'd sleep in cramped, unsanitary barracks, often chained to your sleeping place, lying on a rough straw mat on a dirt floor. Privacy was non-existent. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, waste, and disease. Food, as mentioned, was meager and often contaminated, leading to rampant outbreaks of dysentery and other waterborne illnesses. Medical care was non-existent beyond rudimentary, often painful interventions. You'd watch fellow laborers succumb to sickness, their bodies wasting away, knowing that you were just as vulnerable. Escape was a desperate, almost impossible gamble. You were often in remote areas, surrounded by guards, and chained. Even if you somehow managed to break free, you'd be a branded runaway, without resources, and facing an unforgiving landscape where every free person would be incentivized to capture you. The consequences of being caught were horrific, likely severe mutilation, or a slow, agonizing death as a public example. The psychological toll of forced labor was immense. Your spirit would be slowly eroded by the constant degradation, the endless toil, the pervasive fear, and the absolute lack of hope. You would be reduced to a living automaton, driven only by the primal urge to survive another hour, another day. Your identity, your memories, your very humanity would begin to fade under the crushing weight of your servitude. So, as you gaze at the grandeur of the Roman aqueducts, remember that their monumental beauty was built upon a foundation of profound human suffering, forced labor, enforced by chains and cruelty, consumed the lives of countless individuals, reducing them to living tools who toiled, suffered, and often died to bring water to Rome's glorious cities. It certainly makes you appreciate your personal freedom, the right to choose your profession, and the basic dignity afforded to all workers today, doesn't it? For these laborers, the aqueduct was a testament to Rome's power, but also a monument to their endless, brutal agony. You've just been immersed in the brutal reality of forced labor, chains, and cruelty, the agonizing truth behind Roman aqueduct construction. But even after the immense structures were completed and water flowed to Rome, the work and its inherent dangers were far from over. Now, prepare to explore the relentless and often solitary grimness of maintenance and repairs. Endless toil. Forget easy fixes. The vastness and complexity of the aqueduct system demanded constant, dangerous work, from cleaning murky channels to fixing crumbling arches, a perpetual struggle against nature and decay. Imagine yourself a laborer, perhaps one of the Aquarii aqueduct workers, assigned to the maintenance of Rome's sprawling aqueduct system. The monumental task of construction might be over, but the aqueduct is a living, breathing entity, constantly battling against natural forces and the wear and tear of time. Your work is no less vital, and often just as dangerous, as that of the initial builders. One of your primary duties is cleaning the channels. The aqueduct water, though relatively clean, still carried silt, algae, and mineral deposits that would build up over time. Obstructing the flow, imagine crawling through dark, narrow underground channel specus, sometimes barely large enough for a man, in perpetual gloom. Your only light a flickering lamp? You'd be scraping away slimy residue, chipping off hard mineral scale calcium carbonate, often called sinter, and pushing accumulated silt forward. The air would be damp, stale, and often filled with the smell of stagnant water and mold. This was claustrophobic, dirty, and utterly monotonous work, performed in an environment perfect for disease. A common historical fact is that workers often carved small niches or breathing holes in the channel walls for oxygen, showing how cramped and airless these spaces could be. Beyond silt, leaks and cracks were a constant problem. Aqueducts, despite their robust construction, were not immune to the effects of earthquakes, ground shift, or the natural degradation of mortar and stone over centuries. Imagine being sent to locate a leak in a dark tunnel, perhaps feeling the cold drip of water from above, or hearing the ominous sound of water rushing where it shouldn't be. Repairs involved chiseling out old mortar, preparing new cement like opus signatum or pozzolana concrete, and meticulously sealing cracks, often in damp, uncomfortable conditions. This required precise work in challenging environments, and a single mistake could lead to further damage or a catastrophic collapse. Then there's the precarious work on the arches and bridges. Even after construction, these towering structures required constant inspection and repair. Imagine yourself, just like the initial builders, perched high on temporary scaffolding, hundreds of feet above the ground, exposed to the elements. You'd be inspecting crumbling mortar, replacing cracked stones, or shoring up weakened sections. The wind would whip around you, and the dizzying height would be a constant terror. A single misstep, a loose stone, or a rotting plank could send you plummeting to your death. There were no safety harnesses, no modern fall protection. Your life was a constant gamble with gravity. Historians still debate the specific frequency of major aqueduct collapses, but continuous maintenance was vital to prevent them. Minor repairs were a daily necessity. The maintenance work was often solitary or in small, isolated teams. Unlike the massive gangs of initial construction, you might spend long hours alone in a dark tunnel, or isolated on a high arch. Your only companions, the creaking of stone and the murmur of flowing water. This could lead to a unique kind of loneliness. Combined with the constant vigilance required for safety and precision, the weather remained a relentless adversary. Scorching summers caused sunstroke and dehydration while working outdoors on exposed channels. Freezing winters could cause water to expand and crack pipes and channels, requiring emergency repairs in brutal cold. Rainstorms could lead to erosion or increased debris in the channels, making cleaning even more difficult. Your body was constantly battling the elements, regardless of the season. The very success of the aqueduct system meant a never-ending cycle of labor. The cities of Rome and its provinces relied entirely on this constant flow of water. If you failed in your maintenance duties, the water supply would dwindle, leading to public dissatisfaction, disease, and potential unrest. This meant immense pressure to keep the system flowing, regardless of the danger or discomfort. Your work was crucial, yet largely invisible to the citizens who enjoyed its benefits, until something went wrong. So, as you take a refreshing sip of water from your tap tonight, remember that for countless laborers, maintaining Rome's aqueducts was an endless, dangerous, and often solitary toil. From crawling through dark, murky channels to scaling crumbling arches, their lives were a constant battle against decay and the elements, ensuring the flow of Rome's lifeblood. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern infrastructure maintenance and the safety of the workers who perform it. Doesn't it? For the aqueduct workers, the monument to Rome's glory was a never-ending source of their own quiet, dangerous labor. You've just explored the relentless, often solitary, grimness of aqueduct maintenance, a never-ending battle against nature and decay. As our journey through the awful realities of Roman aqueduct construction concludes, let's reflect on the ultimate silent truth, the cost of grandeur, human lives. Forget the architectural marvel. The truth is that Rome's magnificent aqueducts, symbols of its power and ingenuity, were built and maintained on a foundation of immense human suffering, high mortality rates, and the silent sacrifices of countless laborers. Imagine yourself not as an individual worker, but as an anonymous statistic in the grand ledger of Roman construction. You are one of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of lives consumed by the relentless pursuit of bringing water to distant cities. The aqueducts stand as towering monuments to engineering, but they are also monuments to the expendability of human life in the Roman world. Consider the sheer scale of the project. Miles upon miles of channels, bridges, and tunnels, carved through mountains and valleys, all built with primitive tools and brute force. This required an immense, sustained labor force, drawn from the ranks of slaves, condemned criminals, and conscripted peasants. These were individuals with little or no rights, whose lives were considered cheap, whose bodies were mere tools to be used until they broke. Imagine an endless procession of men, constantly being replaced as disease, accident, or exhaustion claimed their predecessors. A common historical fact is that vast numbers of Roman slaves and convicts were used for the most dangerous and arduous public works, with little concern for their welfare. The mortality rates on these projects were horrifyingly high. Think back to the dangers we've explored: quarrying crushing rockfalls, injuries from heavy tools, and slow death from silicosis. The dust-choked lungs, tunneling suffocation from lack of oxygen, sudden cave-ins burying men alive, and the pervasive claustrophobia. Bridge building. Terrifying falls from immense heights, crushing accidents with massive stone blocks, and the sheer peril of working on rickety scaffolding. Lead poisoning. The insidious, chronic agony of stomach cramps, neurological damage, and slow organ failure from handling lead pipes. Waterborne diseases. Rampant dysentery, typhoid, and other illnesses spreading through unsanitary camps and contaminated water. Sunstroke and dehydration, yasai, agonizing collapse, delirium, and death under the scorching Mediterranean sun. Accidents and injuries, constant falls, crushing wounds, and severe cuts that almost invariably led to fatal infections due to lack of medical care. Each of these dangers, individually, was a terrifying prospect. Collectively, they formed a brutal gauntlet that ensured only the strongest and luckiest might survive for long. For countless others, the aqueduct became their tomb, their bodies buried beneath its foundations, or simply discarded in unmarked graves near the construction sites. Their names were rarely recorded, their suffering unacknowledged. Historians still face challenges in quantifying precise mortality rates for Roman construction projects due to incomplete records, but the indirect evidence points to extremely high rates, far exceeding modern industrial accidents. The very efficiency of Roman engineering, the ability to complete such monumental projects, was inextricably linked to this willingness to expend human lives. There were no labor unions, no safety regulations, no moral outcry. The societal value placed on the aqueduct, bringing clean water to the cities, enabling baths, fountains, and urban prosperity, far outweighed any concern for the individual suffering of its builders. The lives lost were simply a cost of doing business, a grim line item in the imperial budget. This grim reality contrasts sharply with the awe we feel today when looking at these surviving structures. We marvel at their beauty, their longevity, their ingenuity. But beneath that grandeur lies a silent testament to suffering, a hidden foundation built from the pain, sweat, and sacrificed lives of untold thousands. The water that flowed into Rome's magnificent fountains and baths was, metaphorically, tainted by the silent agony of those who made it possible. So, as you take a moment to appreciate clean running water in your own home in Haiduong tonight, remember that for the Roman aqueduct workers, the cost of imperial grandeur was paid in the most brutal currency, human lives. Their agony was the invisible mortar, their blood the forgotten lubricant, that made these ancient wonders stand. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern human rights, safety standards, and dignity in labor. Doesn't it for them? The aqueduct was a magnificent testament to Rome, and a tragic monument to their own expendability. You have completed the journey through the horrific realities of Roman aqueduct construction. We have explored the arduous work of quarrying stone, the suffocating nightmare of tunneling, the deadly dangers of bridge building, the silent plague of lead poisoning, the invisible threat of waterborne diseases, the ravages of heat stroke and dehydration, the accidents and injuries that had no rescue, the brutality of forced labor, the endless work of maintenance and repair, and finally the ultimate price of greatness, countless human lives. As you drift off to sleep, let the images of the massive stones, the great structures, and the lives that were sacrificed to create them fade away. It is a poignant reminder that behind every great work in history, there is often a story of untold pain and sacrifice by the people who built them.